One of the areas that we do see that could potentially mitigate some of those challenges to profit, as Sophie said, is ESG. ESG is something that we've been talking about with clients and businesses for a number of years, and the temperature gauge around how much of it will become hygiene versus how much of it just has to become normal ordinary course has been something that has been a continual debate, but it definitely continues to be on the horizon. And what we wanted to do today is to take you through the landscape as we see it, because unless you are thinking about ESG, it's something that you could catch a cold on in the medium term as we get through the next 12 months and some of the short-term challenges. And this ESG agenda continues to be something that for the sector is going to have a serious impact. So we've moved onto the next slide, and I'd like to invite Tom and Zoe to join me. And again, if we just move forward. So Zoe, can you help us understand what is the ESG landscape? It's a word that everyone hears, listens to, but what is it truly, and how do we see it, and how do we see it affecting our sector?
Yeah, thank you. So it is very much 3 letters that get used quite a lot at the moment, but 3 letters that cover a very broad spectrum. So the environmental, the climate change aspect is very much constantly in the news. There's a lot of focus, a lot of attention, but the ESG agenda is not just about the environmental aspects. It's not just about reducing your climate change emissions. What you can see here on this slide is that it pretty much covers across all of the different areas of a business. It's really, I guess, thinking about how you're responding to climate change, but then how you're also treating your workers, how you are building trust, fostering innovation, and also managing your supply chain. So something that is very far-reaching and not necessarily something that you can just designate to one individual to manage. It's also something that there's not an easy one-size-fits-all approach to. In terms of ESG and what it means for a business, it will very much be dependent on your business's purpose, your business model, kind of your brand, what you're trying to achieve, but also the different importance of different stakeholders. So whether it's employees, consumers, lenders, investors, they'll all have different focuses on different elements of the ESG agenda. So it's really understanding what is important to your business, how can you manage risks and opportunities, but also then use those as an opportunity to build success across the short, medium and longer term.
And so we can see the landscape there, Zoe, but as we look into the retail sector, Tom, what areas do you think that some of our clients, businesses in the retail sector are really having to, but also wanting to focus on within this landscape?
Well, firstly, I think when you see a chart like this, it really brings home the depth we are actually talking about when it relates to ESG. And in particular, I think we're seeing a lot of focus in retail and hospitality, certainly around the social and the climate change, so the E and the S really. And we can see that people are starting to use it as not only a commercial benefit, but also a differentiation against their peers. And if you take some examples in different areas, so in human capital, the kind of talent attraction in this sector is hugely important. And the benefits that people would have probably typically looked for in 2019 are starting to be heavily scrutinized. And we've obviously been through a period where people's well-being has been much more promoted and put in quite rightly into the forefront. Diversity and inclusion is a significant area of focus for many businesses. So we are seeing a different approach to how people are going about rewarding and providing differentiated employee experiences. And those in turn, given the high staff cost base that are usually evident in a retailer, is something that I think is a focus. And on the other side, in the environmental area, you have got people really starting to look at their ongoing cost and impact in society as it relates to their carbon footprint, or just in terms of the goods. Retail, especially apparel, gets a very bad reputation in terms of the amount of goods that are sold or produced globally. And so you're really starting to see people take into consideration how they can use their big audience to try and change behaviours. And the most recent example of interest has been the collaboration with Marks and Spencer's and High Street, trying to really promote the circular economy. So I think that mainly in the S and the E, we're starting to see retailers really focus.
And some of those points, Tom, clearly people are looking at how they change their business to be a better business under this title. But Zoe, how much of this is just going to become regulation, and therefore people listening into us today actually in probably not too short an order are going to have to do this rather than doing it because they choose to?
I think a lot of it is probably the short answer. So I think, unfortunately, to drive, I guess, development in this area, we are seeing increasing regulation. So if you look back over recent years, there's already been kind of specific ESG focused regulations. So there's those around carbon emissions, gender pay, modern slavery, that have been around for a number of years, but it's going to be something that's going to continue. We expect it to be ramping up and getting broader in terms of, you know, what companies and businesses are needing to do. I guess a recent example really is TCFD, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So this was originally a voluntary disclosure requirement established back in 2015, but in 2020, the UK government announced that they would be mandating it on a phased approach through to 2025. So there will have been businesses that were choosing to adopt this historically, but now it's very much requiring that to be very much the norm. It's taking it further than just understanding what is a business's impact on the environment, and it's looking at what is the impact of climate change on a business. So there's been a lot of attention to date on how do we reduce our carbon emissions. But I guess even if your business does achieve net zero, climate change is still happening. Unless everyone, you know, does their part, there is still going to be an impact. So it's about how does the impact of climate change, the risks and opportunities that there is, how do they impact your business? How are you going to be responding to those in the short, the medium, and the longer term? It's very much a disclosure-based requirement, so something that will be within annual reporting alongside financial reporting, but it isn't as specific as other reporting requirements, where it's understand what the risks and opportunities are to your business and then report on those, identify metrics that demonstrate how you are managing and exploiting those risks and opportunities. So for example, there'll be physical risks that will impact businesses. So for example, with retail, products will come from kind of raw materials. We're seeing, for example, particular materials can become more scarce. So in the shorter term, you might be looking at how you're diversifying your supply chain, but in the medium longer term, it can evolve into an opportunity. So how are you innovating your product range to kind of place yourself in a better position? There's also then the transition element. So the transition to the lower carbon economy, like Tom mentioned. So how are you putting yourself in a position that in the future, as we're seeing kind of the trend for lower carbon, greener products increasing, how are you going to be best placed to kind of respond to that? But it's linking it very much back to the financial aspect, your business, not just from a sort of greener aspect.
Thanks, Zoe. And picking up one of the points that you raised there, and it is going to be the theme that we move on to after this session, just around the challenges in the global supply chain that we specifically saw through that COVID period, but for our sector, we're continuing to see them as we go through 2022. With those challenges, with that supply chain suffering slightly, Tom, do you think that this ESG landscape should spark a change, maybe helps in some of those challenges that businesses are seeing?
I think we have seen an element of change. I think we can't underestimate how many things different businesses have been trying to juggle in the last 18 months. And typically a supply chain review or an overhaul is quite a comprehensive initiative for a business to undertake. But I think there are certainly, as Zoe indicated, some raw materials and resources which are now being either being reduced in terms of the volumes that you can get hold of, or becoming cost prohibitive to bring from whatever destination you were bringing them from originally, that are making people have to really consider what ingredients or garment types they are selling. And so I think we are going to start to see more a shift. Certainly, a lot of products coming from Asia, and everyone's probably seen the imagery of the kind of Shanghai waters and how crowded they all are with nothing moving anywhere. People are going to need to validate other sources for supply. I also think within the supply chain infrastructure, people are going to consider how can they actually reduce their footprint as it relates to electric vehicles. And we saw the big announcements with Amazon really moving the agenda there. I also think the kind of consumption and space utilization as it relates to warehousing and the energy drain that would have is an area of focus. And we've seen some really interesting initiatives about zero footprint warehousing space, energy efficient warehousing space, all really trying to not only control costs because they can be cost beneficial, but also to really start to think about their impact as a supply chain on both the environment and the economy.
And as we talk about the ESG agenda, I think it would be wrong for us to stand here and think that people haven't got a very long to-do list right now, and particularly in the short term. Do we think this is something that people will move to one side so that they can look to overcome some of the shorter term challenges? And if they do that, is that going to be a bigger challenge for them as they move forward? Tom, I'll start with you, and then maybe Zoe, we can get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mentioned that there are a lot of things that businesses are trying to achieve at the moment, and some of the kind of headwinds that we're facing are top priority. But I think we've also got to understand the kind of wave of consumer sentiment that's coming through, the kind of power and the spend that will sit with the younger generations, the millennials. Ethical products or ethical sourcing is now featuring in a lot of top 3, what we say KPCs, are key purchase criteria. So it has to be evident that retailers, businesses, brands have either ethical products, ethical sourcing, or are really truly believing some of this is coming through. So I think the ones that are trying to cover up possibly infrastructure or supply chains that are working but not necessarily as sound or as ethical are going to be found out by the consumers. So I think there is going to be a drive driven probably by the consumers to ask more from those retailers and brands. The second bit that I do think we are going to have, we will see more visibly is the kind of authentic stories you are seeing from brands and how they use that to engage customers. So you can already hear and see certain brands with much more clear purpose who have gained significant traction because the ability with the right narrative and the right story to engage across social media, across other marketing channels is vast. And you can point to the kind of global brands like Patagonia, or you can see more smaller brands that are really already, whilst revenues might not be so significant, audience following is huge. And I think that's going to be quite a trend coming forward, to seeing these small brands become quite large quite quickly.
Zoe, anything to add?
I think it's all about just really, I think the first point I made about understanding what it means in the context of your business. And there will be different elements that have more of an impact in the short, the medium and the longer term. And it's really important just to have it in mind. So when you are going through key decisions or looking at kind of strategies, having these elements in mind, thinking about what the impact is. Is it something that you need to be considering now, particularly some of the environmental pieces or the social pieces, or is it something that will become kind of more important kind of in the next few years? I think one of the things can often think is like, so for example, net zero 2050 target sounds a very long way away. It will come round very quickly, so it's having it in your mind so that you don't kind of not react until it is too late.
Perfect. Well, thank you both. Hopefully for our audience today, there's a bit of food for thought in some of the discussion we've had around the ESG agenda.